Started with the redevelopment agency meeting of whatever today is, December 3rd, 2019. I do want to just let all of you know that Charlie Luke, he actually had surgery last week, and so he is joining, he's watching from home. He will be joining in at some points. I will, of course, let everyone know and make a record of when he joins into the meeting. But I wanted everyone to know that he's watching on Facebook, which all of you at home can also watch on Facebook. It's rather entertaining and informative. And then, so he's listening to all of the discussions, and when he wants to chime in, we'll acknowledge him and let him chime in. And Erin is not here either, but she may or may not be watching from Boston. Who knows? So with that, I'm going to get my agenda out, and we're going to get started. We are going to start with our general comments to the board. I do want to make a couple of disclosures. We do ask that people respect other people's time. It will be 2 minutes per person. We ask that there's no cheering, jeering, snapping, clapping, and mostly this is out of respect for the person that's speaking. We want to be able to hear them. When it gets too loud, we certainly aren't able to hear what the person is trying to convey to us. And while we may not respond to a question at that moment, it's not our place to respond. It's your place to tell us what you would like to hear. We can always follow up later, get with one of our staff members, and make sure that if there's a question that you'd like a follow-up from one of us, we're happy to do that. I think that's everything. One of the things I will do, I'm sort of separating these a little bit as much as I can. If there's well, nope, I'm just gonna go for it. So first come, first serve. I'll read 2 names at a time. If you have a card, go ahead, hold up your card. One of our staff, our beautiful friend here, Bobby, will come by like Vanna White and pick it up and hand it to me. I'll call 2 names at a time, and if the second person just kind of will get ready to come up. If it's easier, we also have a microphone, and we can hand the microphone to you. You can just stand up in your seat. So we try to make this as accommodating as possible. If there's more than you want to say that takes after your 2 minutes, we have staff in the hallway. They're happy to accommodate, or you can certainly email us or call, okay? So with that, I'm going to start with Zachary Moses and then Robert Stefanik.
Okay, hey everybody, I'm Zach Moses. I should meet all of you. I'm actually running for governor. So hello, nice to meet you. I just recently became aware of this theater being torn down. I'm born in 1983, so the theater was closed. So we always just walked by the terrible looking entrance, which it doesn't look great. And I've now been shown the pictures from inside of that theater. And this is too precious to be torn down. There should be, if you want to put housing above it, cool. They're doing that in California at the California Theater, which is also a historic vaudeville theater. I run a travel company for a living, and we actually moved our company here back home to Salt Lake City, looking to expand tourism here. And this is a fantastic tourism opportunity to just tear it to the ground. This is precious. This is old growth wood. This is beautiful work done by our ancestors, and to tear it to the ground is just a travesty. So I know that this has been signed, but you're also the city, so there's a little more that you can do. And I'm stressing to you, at least consider some amendments that make sure that the theater is protected, and you can do this. This is being done elsewhere, and this is irreplaceable treasure. I can't believe it's not already on our historic registry. And let the public come into the building. You'll find out that this is how most people feel. So please don't erase our history.
Good evening, or good afternoon, members of the board. Now, last time I was up here, I talked about ideas and what you could do if the theater was restored to bring money in. This theater is the last production house, after research, is the last production house in all of Utah that's a 70 millimeter theater production house in all of Utah. This past Sundance, they were looking for a 70 millimeter production house to film the show Apollo 11 film from the moon landing. We could have used that, if the theater was restored, we could have had some money coming in, not just to the theater, but also to local businesses and hotels from people staying here. On top of that, I come from upstate New York, where they have, and where I grew up, a restored theater, not like the theater we're trying to save, but a restored theater in general, and it's always making money, and it's always bringing money to the city of Corning, New York. Tearing down this building, knowing that a historic theater like this can actually bring in money in more ways than one is just wasteful in my eyes, and seeing that, knowing that this could be saved because of the other theaters have been restored for a lot cheaper than what you have priced it out as, can be shown greatly, and nothing will ever replace this, and that no matter what you put on top of it, it can never replace it. It can never truly show the history of this city like the theater did in old pictures of the main street of Salt Lake City. We've already lost enough theaters in this city alone, on Main Street alone. We don't need to lose another. Thank you.
Hello. So we were here a couple weeks ago, and I kind of left the meeting pretty positive. It sounded like they wanted to hear some other ideas to save the theater, and Charlie even said 30 days, which I guess turns out to be 23 days here. But since then, we've been working with architects, developers. We even had a developer ready to fly out to see the theater last week, but the RDA wouldn't let us in because of the contract being signed. I have here a bunch of theaters that have already been restored. These are the Toronto Pantages, the Tacoma Pantages. I mean, these are the exact same family of theaters. There's been a misconception that this theater is too far gone. I think if you look at this picture of the Philadelphia Met Opera, it's in way worse condition than our theater was, and it was just restored in 2018. In front of me here, I have a letter from the State Historical Office talking about tax credits and the Historical Registry, and how the theater can still be applied for the registry and receive, it says between $10 to $12 million in tax credits. And these tax credits, they could be sold, they could be used to loan, to be lent against like an asset, and then get even more money to see this theater restored. So 2 minutes isn't much to talk about this. So I have some documents that I'm going to give to all you guys. I hope you read them, and I hope you help us save this theater. There's lots of people out here that want to save it. There's developers, there's architects. We can still save this thing. You know, it doesn't have to be torn down. It can be a beautiful theater that lasts, you know, the next 50, 100 years, and bring tons of tourism and art and film back into our city and state. So.
Gregory, followed by Casey O'Brien McDonough.
I'm here to speak on behalf of my grandfather, Henry Mack Smith, who was the stage manager of the Pantages Theater, and my family who have been in the film business. That is such a beautiful theater inside. You know, I'm grateful for Palmer DePaulos, a former mayor, who kept him from destroying this building we're in. To try to build something like this today, you can't do, and to try to build a theater with the ornate work and so forth, like the Utah Theater, the Utah Pantages Theater, is impossible. When I go to visit other cities, I don't go to see myriads of pastel-colored apartment buildings that are coming up in our valley. I go to see structures that are historically significant, and the Utah Pantages Theater is one of those. You've got to have wisdom instead of expediency when it comes to history, because vaudeville went away because of motion pictures. and drive-in theaters went away because of daylight savings time, and things are changing. But the future generations of this city need to understand that the Lyric, which is gone, was a vaudeville house. It was Lowe's. The Orpheum, which is now the Capitol Theater, which was restored, was a vaudeville house, and people traveled. There were circuits that people traveled on. But I would urge you to not throw away the history of this city and the information that it would give to our future children and grandchildren of what the city was like back in the early days, because things revolved differently then than they do now. I'm grateful for your efforts, and I know it's a hard decision, but I hope that you will be wise and understand that once it's gone, it's gone.
Time.
I have Casey, followed by Carol McDonough. Yeah, Carol. I had to read.
You're going to get the whole family really fast. So I don't agree with my dad. That was my dad about everything. But I agree with them about the theater. I've got the sticker on, so it's probably apparent. I have a hard time with we'll say, significant criticism, right? And I think it stems from me not liking people directing that towards me. So I just want to preface what I'm going to say with, I understand there may be things I don't know, and if I'm incorrect about something, I just want to be informed. That's really what the public wants. They don't want to be kept in the dark until the last minute and feel like things are ramrodded through. So I'm going to address the context of the agreement you're looking at and how much they're talking about selling this property for. I emailed you all about this as well. I would start with the appraisal. I don't know anybody in the real estate market that would say anything but having a property in 2010 means that you have something worth more today. And as far as I can tell, we're selling the theater in this development for the same price. Talking to people in the industry, that they're coming up with, they're telling me, this is informal obviously, but they're saying it should be worth $10 to $12 million for that property. When you compare that against tax records of other similar properties with similar constraints that are being built that have to have parking agreements with other properties, residential or office, you find a much higher per square foot property value than what they're offering this theater for. And then on top of all that, just a quick Google search yesterday found that large Tiffany glassworks are worth hundreds, if not millions of dollars, right? I haven't heard anybody talk about the actual value of that artwork other than it's going to live in this new development. So I think there's some serious issues with the valuation and how we got to it and the assumptions that are being made. To me, it seems like, I wouldn't go as far as to say a corporate giveaway. I would say that in private dealings, land dealings, you can make any deal you want, but this is not a private land deal. This is a public land deal. So, save the Utah Theater. Thanks, you guys.
Following Carol, I have Mr. Johnson.
Brought her props again. I'll be right back.
I didn't bring the props. He brought the props. He thinks they're very important. Preserving historic places allows us to bring our children and grandchildren to them to experience the emotion of a previous time. That's the importance of the ornamentation inside this theater. It allows us to share with our children and grandchildren the history of their families. When I was little growing up in southern Idaho, my mother would tell me about going to the Pantages, to the vaudeville, to see Bob Hope, and then the spelling bee afterwards. And she would always tell me about these fire hose holders that were on the wall. And she would always use her arm and say, and they said, Pantages Theater. So when they closed the Utah, my husband and I went down to tour the building to look at it because he had family interest in it too. And there on the floor of the basement were these fire hose holders that my mother had talked about, and I was able to buy them, and they've spent the last 30 years in my basement. So connecting with that history lets us know our own family history, our own genealogy, if you will. It helps us understand what has gone on in the past and how people lived and more importantly, to feel the emotion of the time and how people felt about things.
Mr. Johnson, followed by Pete Ashdown.
Of course, the council knows who I am and know who you are. I'm going to try to cover two areas really quickly. First of all is when you go to the website of the RDA, it states quite patently what your policies are. General redevelopment goals, number 6, help create welcoming public gathering places, promote the uniqueness, character, and identity of neighborhoods, encourage historical preservation, implement housing policies with a range of housing options, including home ownership and for all income levels. In the backdoor deal that you did, based on a policy that I will make an argument for that is illegal, you agreed to sell this theater to somebody without following state laws for the disposal of public property. I believe that's what's happened. But I hope that you can listen to the other people in this meeting and hear their hearts to want to preserve something that is important to them and to the character of Salt Lake. This theater is truly something that is worth preserving. There could be a workaround. The money that you loan out, because you do loan out a lot of money. You loaned out $110 or $170 million bond on the Eccles Theater. You could also loan out money or bond to do something with this theater. It's not going to require as much money as they stated to do the renovation. You could work something out with the Heinz Corporation to build a superstructure over the top of it. So you could accomplish both goals. You have that ability and creativity as a council, and I hope that you would exercise that. The last thing I want to talk about is a very specific statute under the Utah Code about the disposal of public property, which requires a notice that goes out, not just a public hearing. I don't believe there was a notice. And that notice has to be public. And there's also an opportunity for the sale of something, for an appeal in the district court, which is mentioned in the law. And I think that's something important. I don't know how the council decided in 2018 to create a policy which can be challenged in a court of law, to create a policy that allowed the sale of something without public hearing, without public input.
After Pete, I have Matt Mateus.
For the past 4 years, the entirety of Mayor Biskupski's term, the city and the RDA have been locked in exclusive negotiations with LaSalle and subsequently Heinz and on the Utah Theater. LaSalle approached the city in 2015 with the promise of restoring the Utah Theater into a dinner theater, a promise which subsequently failed after a year of exclusive negotiations. Instead of opening the process up to other proposals, the exclusivity with LaSalle was extended, then extended again until the city finally said it had exhausted all options and agreed with LaSalle and Heinz that the theater could not be saved. Informing the public is not the same as involving the public. You have examined two options: giving the property to someone who will destroy it, or relying on the solitary financing of CBD bonds to restore it. I would love to spend more than 2 minutes relating my experience of the past 3 months talking with donors, developers, preservationists, and architects, but that is not possible within the course of 2 minutes. However, your decision comes down to whether 4 years of exclusive developer negotiations without meeting the initial goal of restoring the theater, without allowing competing proposals or the possibility of a public ballot bond, should be rewarded by giving a downtown property away worth millions to entities also worth millions. Does this serve the public interest for which the theater was originally purchased? If you believe you cannot stand up to the mayor acting as executive dictator of the RDA and stop this travesty of a process, then you should at least set the price of the theater at market rates and demand all the public amenities are met. Thank you.
Hi. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a different item on your agenda. My name is Matt Mateus, and today I'm here wearing two hats. One is a longtime, nearly 20-year resident of Central 9th neighborhood, and the other as the Deputy Director of SpyHop, which, as you know, is currently under construction on the corner of 9th South and 2nd West. I am requesting that the council approve the 900 South streetscape improvements. As a neighbor, husband, father, pedestrian, cyclist, patron of local establishments in the area, my concern is the safety of the streets surrounding our neighborhood, specifically the traffic. We as a neighborhood have witnessed an alarming increase in erratic driving behavior through our streets. This occurs now throughout the day and on a daily basis. This is most notable to me on Jefferson Street, where I reside, and during rush hour. The traffic affects our lives. It prevents my family from riding bikes safely in the neighborhood, my daughter from being able to walk safely to her school 4 blocks away, and I have an ongoing concern for the children and pets in our neighborhood that risk getting run over by speeding cars trying to shave a minute or 2 off of their commutes. I feel like the most affected area in 9th is 9th South, especially near the freeway and the on and off ramp. It's very dangerous, and the accidents at this intersection seem like a weekly occurrence. In an attempt to alleviate this problem, we as a neighborhood have requested speed traps and speed bumps, but we've received no support. We realize that these are Band-Aid solutions. We need to promote traffic calming and walkability. As the Deputy Director of SpyHop, my concern is and has always been the safety of our students. We will be bringing hundreds of young people down to Central 9th several times a day from across the Salt Lake Valley, and I would like these students to experience our neighborhood as a safe and welcoming place. And finally, I'd like to note that we know that the issue of the SAA has been raised.
Time.
However, as a nonprofit organization, special assessments can be particularly burdensome, especially when budgets are already strained, and this would be a difficult circumstance for SpyHop to maintain. Thank you.
I have Jeff Thompson, and then that is the last general comment card I have. Is there anyone else out there that is interested in speaking? If you'll just raise your hand, and Bobby will get you a card. If you have a card, raise your hand. Mr. Thompson, sorry to interrupt that, but please come on up.
City Council, I understand the issue today regarding the Utah theaters. You are here to decide the public value of the so-called public benefits that Hines is offering in exchange for the property. It's been said that what they have offered, as I understand it, is a sidewalk and reduced rent on 30 units for 50 years and architectural salvage in exchange for the purchase price. So in effect, you'd be giving away the property for free. I don't think that's fair to us as citizens of Salt Lake City. I think they should charge fair market value. Anybody who purchased a home 9 years ago knows that their taxes have gone up and values are about double. I think the fair market value is probably more toward $10 or $12 million, and I think that's what I think that's what they should be charged. Otherwise, this does look like a clear case of corporate welfare. More importantly, I think this brings up the fact, I've heard from many of you, I think you're sympathetic to the fate of the theater, but this was done by Mayor Biskupski behind closed doors. And I think this speaks to something that you as a city council need to change. Perhaps too much power has been vested in the mayor, and that you as a city council need to take that away so that you are involved and that we, the public, are involved as well in decisions concerning historic buildings and other important properties in Salt Lake City. That this can't be done with one mayor behind closed doors. I think it's unfair to us as citizens of the city, and I think it's up to you to change that. If the Utah Theater is torn down, I think it's a travesty. But let's stop this from happening in the future. Thank you.
I received a couple more cards. I have Kimber Pino. Did Kimber want to speak? Yeah, and if you want the microphone to you, we can bring it right on over.
Hello. I was here last month, or 23 days ago. And I told you that I'm an interior designer in commercial and residential design, and I have been for the past 9 years. So I've been a part of preserving and part of taking care of the buildings that we have, and part of our growth. And I think our growth is good. There's a lot of positives to it, but it shouldn't be at the expense of buildings that show our history. What we see in here cannot be repeated. Not at all, not possible by any stretch of the imagination, because this has history built into it. It has design motifs and details that current interior designers won't know how to replicate. This is not able to come back. I know you all know that. And Chris, Amy, James, Andrew, Anna, please take this seriously. I don't know how many times we need to come and talk about this, how many news reports there needs to go on about people saying that they want to save this. And I know you can only do so much, but please do your best. This matters to a lot of people, a lot more than the ones that are actually here. And we have lots of meetings, committee meetings of people that reach out and talk to us and tell us how much they want to have this building saved. Please, please listen to us. This is important to us. Thank you.
I have Myron McDonald and then Matt Osmond.
I'd like to open and thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to come here and talk. A little bit about me. I've been an employee here in downtown Salt Lake for 15 years. I've had many opportunities to go work at other firms in the area that would pay me more money, but the one thing that has kept me downtown is the character and uniqueness. You know, Sandy doesn't offer that. West Jordan doesn't offer that. I could go work on those other places, but one of the things that kept me in downtown was the unique character, and I mean, it's different. You can't get that anywhere else in the valley. You can't get that in Sandy. You can't get that in West Jordan. And what do you guys have when you compete face-to-face with the suburbs? You guys have character and you guys have history on your side, and that's unique. You know, you can't fake that. I've talked with a few developers that specialize in historic buildings, and they are just floored that anyone would even consider destroying this building. I mean, some of these have actually walked through the theater, and you guys have probably actually talked with some of these developers. Word on the street was that when Heinz got involved in this, that the theater would be toast. Everybody knew that when Heinz got involved, that it was going to go the way of the gutter. Our petition online has gathered 4,200 signatures. It's growing. It's moving in the right direction. And in closing, I would just like to say with a quote here, "Any city gets what it admires, will pay for, and ultimately deserves. And we will probably be judged not by the monuments we build, but by those we have destroyed." And that is Ada Lewis Huxtable, and she wrote that in 1963 in regards to the farewell to Penn Station. And that's my closing.
Matt Osmond is the last card I currently have. If you have a card, Bobby will snag it from you. Hi.
Hello, I'm Matt Osmond. I live in District 3, and I am a lover of history, but I'm also a lover of progress. I understand things get worn out, things have to be replaced. The building that is proposed to replace the theater is beautiful. Whenever I hear there's going to be a new skyrise in Salt Lake, I'm like, yes, a cooler skyline. I go to Boston, great skyline. But what Boston has, they have a great skyline. They also have wonderful preservation. This theater is irreplaceable. I understand it's in pretty bad shape right now, and that's our fault. That's everyone in this room's fault. And we have the opportunity to save it. And I won't sit by and be quiet until that is heard, and everything we can do to possibly save this theater is thought through. Because right now, I think we're really this close to doing what Salt Lake has done many times in the past, and that's ripped down a beautiful building and put up a plaque that said, "This beautiful building once stood here." It's unfortunate. There have been too many beautiful buildings lost, all in the name of progress. But like I said, if I'm a lover of progress, and I would love to see this building built, but not in the place of this beautiful theater. Thank you.
I have Joel LaSalle, and then anybody else? Again, this is my last card right now. If you do, just raise your hand. Thank you.
My dad acted in Hollywood with Spencer Tracy, danced with Ginger Rogers. He was an extra, and he taught us the theater as children. I went to the Nationals. I was a debate forensics star from Bountiful. I share this passion. I have for years. I was asked by this city, by Rocky Anderson, that's how long really this has been going on, to get involved in this project, and I am one of these people. I am passionate about this theater. I've cried in this theater asking her, what do you want us to do? I share these people's passion, but I'm telling you, they all have this passion because we all want to believe in something. And as I've gotten involved and gotten educated about this project, not only can she not be saved, she isn't alive. This needed to happen 4 decades ago. The pictures that you're seeing are not current pictures. The facts that you think that you have, they're not facts. This isn't a meeting about whether this project is going to go on. This is a meeting to discuss whether we give this developer some money so that they can make it beautiful, make the park better than what they would have made it, so that they can provide low-income housing, so that this can be really a landmark to replace this beautiful, beautiful girl that did do everything that all these people are talking about. They just want to believe in something. I did too. Where were all these people 5, 4, 3, 2 years ago? We've tried and tried, and the city has asked us to do something with what is now an eyesore. And when you walk through it now, you can feel the bones and you can see some of the architecture. But we chose the theater across the street to do all of this work in. There's no theater company that we've been able to find anybody that will do this, even if we did come up with the funding. So keep in mind that we're really trying to just do something for the city now. And if the city doesn't want us to do it, we'll go.
I have no more comment cards at this time. Is there anybody out there? Going once, twice? All right. Thank you all for your comments today. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. And that is number 1, the Utah Theater Redevelopment and Sale Pricing Terms Follow-Up. We will have Ben Ludke, Danny Walls, and Tammy Hunsaker at the table, please. I think, Ben, if you perhaps would like to start and just maybe give us an overview quickly. We have, and then we'll turn it over to questions from council members. Questions and comments.
The board held 4 previous briefings, 1 each for the last 4 months, today being the 4th on this topic. The vote, if the board chooses to take a vote today, it is not required to, is whether to approve a land write-down in exchange for 3 required public benefits that were negotiated by the administration in the purchase and sale agreement signed by the mayor. The public benefits are, I'll review them quickly. 10% of the residential units being set aside for low income, which is defined as 60 to 80% of the area median income. This is estimated at 30 units out of the 300 that would be built, and the affordability term is for 50 years. The second required public benefit is a mid-block walkway, which is to be at least 14 feet wide and at least 200 feet long. It could be more than that. Those are the minimums. It is also to be a publicly accessible mid-block walkway with an easement recorded. And the third public benefit is the reuse of historic elements. And this would be a process between a historic preservation expert, the RDA staff, and then the information would come back to the board about which elements were identified as commercially feasible to be reused, and then items that were identified as historic but not commercially feasible for reuse, there could be a separate discussion about what occurs with those features. The total estimated public benefit from these three items is $5.7 to $6.9 million. An appraisal earlier this year in June identified the property at $4,070,000. The difference would be the developers are contributing $1.6 to $2.9 million in public benefits beyond the $4 million land write-down that is before the board for discussion and potential approval. I can go into further details, but I think that's the groundwork where we are.
Okay. Comments, questions? Anna?
Hi, Danny, I just wanted to ask about if you could once again go over the parameters that we as board members have versus administration / executive director or the mayor in this case. What is her role? What is our role? So that the public is very clear what parameters we're making decisions on.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. Under the RDA land disposition policy, as well as within the larger context of separation of powers within the city, the mayor within this context as the agency's executive director has the authority to negotiate for the disposition of property, enter into that agreement, and stipulate what the terms are for that disposition. That is purely an administrative function that falls within the mayor's role. Under the disposition policy, it provides for the fact that if the agency is to consider a request for a write-down of the property that exceeds 10% of the fair market value, then that request and that write-down then needs to come before the board of directors and is a legislative function. And within the parameters of that approval, the board obviously has the ability to add any contingencies or caveats to what the parameters of that write-down are. And so as it falls within this agreement, which the mayor has executed, we have already negotiated what we have called are the required benefits, which is what Ben referred to, as well as put a value on those for the purposes of our negotiation. And that value and those negotiations are what have led us here now today with requesting the board to approve the write-down. So those have already been agreed to and laid out of what the terms are, and then the board now has the ability to approve or deny that write-down as it relates to what those items are, specifically what the value is for those items.
Chris?
So, Danny, if the council votes to no today, not to give, to approve what's before us in terms of the write-down, does the sale of the property go through?
The way the agreement is structured is, yes, the sale can still go through. The agreement is set up to where Hines has the ability to purchase the property at fair market value, and then within their due diligence is to do exactly what we're here today, which is to forward a request for a land write-down in consideration of the requirements and the public benefits that we as the administration of the city have put on the property. So this is not necessarily Hines asking for a write-down just for the sake of corporate welfare or because they don't want to pay fair market value. But those requirements and those public benefits will be placed on the property at closing. So even if Hines pays fair market value, we are recording those against the property. They run with the land, and so those three requirements will be required of anyone who then comes after Hines or as part of the sale to Hines, that they then have the opportunity to still pay fair market value and carry out those benefits. But as we've laid out in the memo, the impact of the cost of those benefits exceeds the value of the property, which is why we are asking for a write-down.
So what if the city just does the sale at fair market value, and let's say that I know that some people say it could be more because it depends on whether or not you consider the theater an asset, which would increase, or if you intend to, the buyer of the property wants to demolish it, then it's considered a liability. So let's say that we get $5 million or $6 million. Then when we bought the overnighter motel, how much did that cost us?
I think it was $4 million when the RDA purchased the property, and that didn't include the additional expense for relocating the current tenants who would have been displaced, as well as the temporary maintenance expenses, such as locking and securing the facility.
So okay, so let's say we've got $6 million and I want to buy another overnighter. It's going to be 4+ to turn that into more affordable housing, which is one of our goals for RDA. And I have maybe, let's say, $1.5 million more. Would that be enough to renovate and create 10 units or 30 units based on the numbers from the overnighter, for example?
A lot of it depends on the specific property you're talking about.
Okay.
I would actually wonder if Tammy wants to chirp in, because she was more involved in the overnighter than I was.
Great.
And we're still negotiating on the deal structure for the overnighter, but on a typical affordable housing project, we actually have a table in the last memo that was provided in November of the city's kind of contributions per affordable housing unit, and those have ranged from about $5,000 to $90,000. They vary widely based on the other public subsidy that's in the project. So a typical affordable housing project that's built in the city does have low-income housing tax credits in it and different layers of affordable housing subsidy. So it really depends on what other subsidies in the project, because we come in last to provide the gap financing. So on the overnighter, they are applying for tax credits right now. On the State Street redevelopment project, they also got tax credits. So the city's contribution can be somewhere around $50,000 a unit if there's other sources of subsidy in the deal.
But total amount all in from the city, even with the tax credits and with all of that, could we do that deal? Could we replicate that deal for $6 million?
So we're in that deal, $4 million for the land acquisition. Another, how much is the recent NOFA loan request? $6 million. So you're in the overnighter, approximately $10 million at this point to do that project.
Okay, and what if I wanted to do that project downtown?
Then you would probably be looking at significantly more than $10 million. You'd probably be looking at probably 1.5 times that.
Okay, so, and then what about, can you explain what the value is of having the mid-block walkway? Like, why is that worth money? Why is that worth, because I've heard it characterized that, we're building this really expensive sidewalk, or that's what we're gaining, sorry, not what we're paying, but what we'd be gaining with the write-down is, in addition to the housing, the mid-block walkway. Explain what is the value of that?
So the mid-block walkways come from the fact that historically Salt Lake City has extremely large blocks of 10 acres, which is extremely rare for cities of our size. And historically, the middle of those blocks have traditionally been deteriorating and not activated uses of property. And so the mid-block walkway concept is really something that comes out of the city's master plans of opening up access to the middle of the blocks, providing access at a pedestrian level through the blocks that cut all the way through so that you're not having to walk around an entire 10-acre block just to go somewhere on the other side of the block. And so that is something that ideally we as a city have had as a master plan and identified areas where we would like to see those mid-block connections made or preserve streets that already exist. And so in this case, this block was not necessarily called out as one of those areas because there has not been a connection traditionally. But it's something that, as a city, we prioritize and try to incorporate in as many developments as we can. And the agency historically has helped fund that so that we can activate the blocks and provide better uses for pedestrians.
Okay. And so this will be like roughly across from the mid-block walk that we created to across Main Street from the mid-block walkway that we created for Regent Street. Is that right?
Correct.
So this will connect, it'd be fair to say that this would connect the Salt Palace to our Main Street and to the Regent Street.
Right. The goal would be to try to provide a connection all the way through the block. And part of having Heinz be a partner in this is because it allows us to then access not just our property of the Utah Theater, but also incorporate their existing property and easements that can provide that connection through the entirety of the block.
Okay, so even though this will be on their private property, there will be a public easement for this connection. Is that
Correct.
right? And there's no, and as you said, it will run with the land. That means that it's permanent. They can't close that off to public access. Is
Correct.
that right? Okay, and how much would it cost for the city, just ballparking it, if we wanted to buy and create that? How much would that cost us to buy up property on a mid-block and create a mid-block walkway in the downtown area?
You're asking me to do math in public, and that's always dangerous. Arguably, it'd be the value of the land times the square footage of the walkway. So if you took 15 feet by, what the length of the block is 660 feet. If you were to have to go out and buy that property, you would have to pay fair market value in order to make that happen. So it would be a straight up land acquisition. So to answer your question, it is much cheaper to incentivize a developer to incorporate it as part of their project, which then also becomes an amenity for their project, rather than us as a city go out and buy the property, construct the walkway, and then arguably have to maintain it as well as a city. So,
Okay, what if I want to build a park downtown? That's been a goal of the city for a long time. And we put away a lot of money to try to have a downtown park. In looking at different options for a downtown park, what are we looking at in terms of like land acquisition, or what options even are there in the downtown area?
so you'd have the same issues. You would have to arguably have enough funds in acquisition to go and pay fair market value for property that you would then have to turn around and also have the funding available to construct the improvements. And then the city would also then need to do on an ongoing basis. You can cut me off.
I have to interrupt you for a minute. If you heard that noise, our two other council members or board members that have been following along are potentially trying to call in. So, Charlie, are you there? They're working on it. It's the other council members trying to get in. I just want to make sure I make a record everybody knows what's going on with that. So sorry to interrupt, Danny. I'll probably do it again, but you're used to that by now.
Yeah. So just doing the math real quickly, if you wanted a 2-acre park and if you wanted to pay what the appraised value is for the Utah Theater, 2 acres would be just straight up acquisition costs of $9 million just in land value. That's not assuming that there's any buildings on the property that you would then also have to pay for. So you would need almost $10 million just in acquisition funds, plus whatever the construction cost would be, as well as the ongoing maintenance funds to do a 2-acre park somewhere in the downtown area.
And I'll just add, in recent conversations with parks, we asked what is the general cost estimate to develop a park, and $1.3 million per acre, so $2.6 million in this instance on top of the purchase price.
And just to clarify, the mid-block cost valuation for the property discount justification in the memo and in the resolution also includes the above-grade improvements of where we were estimating about $100 a square foot on top of the land value. And another clarification, the affordable housing write-down, it is a little bit more for the Utah Theater, just in that the project won't attract a lot of these other traditional affordable housing subsidies that we see in other projects. So we valued the affordable housing component at just over $4 million for this project, for the 30 units.
I want to also just ask too about the seismic issue. That I know it's not you've already explained that regardless of how we vote today, the sale goes through. But I think the public is frustrated because by a lack of transparency, and I've heard from a lot of residents that the seismic, the cost, the estimates to bring the building, if we were, going down a different track, if the mayor had chosen to do that, what the cost would be to make the current Utah Theater safe. How was it determined? First of all, what was that determined to be, and how was that determination made?
That's a good question. I appreciate.
Should the public trust that determination was accurate?
Yeah.
What assurances is there that they have that that's accurate?
So the seismic estimates is kind of based off of 3 different sets of values. The first is within the Utah Film and Media study. They provided an initial estimate of the seismic costs, and we determined that we felt that was low because that was just a blanket line item within that budget and did not necessarily accurately look at what the current condition of the building was, as much as just provide an estimate as part of a larger budget for the construction of the center. So following that, we asked both Oakland and Big D Construction to provide estimates. We received those estimates, and they ranged between $15 and $20 million. And the reason that they had a range is because they were both looking at different square footages for the property. One basically just took
Hi.
the first floor.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good.
Sorry,
Hi.
interrupting again. I just want everyone to be aware that we have both Charlie and Aaron via our awesome technology, which is a speakerphone. So they are here, they're on speakerphone, and to join us at the meeting.
So those 2 numbers range because they looked at different square footages. One was the entire square footage of the building, which includes the basement. The other was more of just the finished square footage. So that's why we had a range there. So we've taken those as basically a range of values that are potential for what the true seismic estimate would be. We do not necessarily stipulate that that's the final numbers. We do not necessarily stipulate that that's the end-all, be-all conversation of seismic, as much as understanding that whatever the end user is for the theater is also going to arguably provide a range for what the total cost of the project is. And so that's why whenever we've talked about the theater, we've always provided that low-end range and that higher-end range and indicated that whatever we do, both the construction costs as well as the seismic costs are going to vary based on what the proposed reuse is and to what extent do you really either preserve the theater and or have to do seismic upgrades. So if we had a specific end user in mind, we could have specific cost estimates, but until then, we've treated it as a potential range of what the cost would be.
I guess I have a kind of a backup question to follow up with Chris's is, with these improvements, what would we be looking at with a property tax estimate on this property towards Salt Lake City?
If you were to ultimately end up with an $80 million theater valued and assume that that's the actual assessed value, which arguably the assessed value is not necessarily what your true construction costs are, but let's assume you get to 80 million, you'd probably be looking at a tax increment generation of maybe 600,000 a year.
And that's, we're talking about not, because if we restored the theater, Salt Lake City would get 0, correct?
Well, you could restore the theater and potentially be at 0 taxable value if you put a nonprofit use in there and they don't pay the property taxes. So that's why when we looked at the pro forma, it's very much dependent on what that end user is in terms of what your options are for financing. And just for relevance, we calculated that a $40 million bond would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 million to support that.
Per year?
Per year.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that would also max out the Central Business District tax increment until the project area expired in 2040. So there would be
Correct.
No other funding sources for other initiatives in the downtown through the RDA.
So can you, just say that, explain that again, that it would take up all of the available tax increment for the downtown area for this one project?
Our current annual tax increment that we receive from the Central Business District is just under $3 million. And so if you were to do a 40 million plus bond for the Utah Theater, and if it was up to the RDA entirely to support the debt service on that bond, you would eat up almost entirely what you're generating from the project area today. And you may or may not have the tax increment to do that if you put a nonprofit use in that building and it doesn't generate tax increment. So,
Okay, and we'd have to agree to that up front in order to make that payment, in order to meet the bond, and then try to find the end user that would help us generate revenue to supplement that.
correct.
How much would the increase be if this development will go through, like our,
So if you did the project, and you mean for Heinz?
yes, so them being there, adding, paying property taxes, how much does the RDA, or the CBD area generate?
So Heinz hasn't fully designed or done their project, but they probably are comfortable to say that this would be upwards of $100 million development. And so in that case, you'd probably be looking at about $800,000 to $850,000 a year in tax increment. And those are extremely rough guesses of numbers right now. Don't hold me to the math on that.
Are there other comments? Andrew?
Thank you. Probably two major questions. One is about the assessed value again. Help me understand that a bit more.
The assessed value?
Yes.
As it relates to what the total construction budget is?
No, just the assessed value, the appraisal itself. The appraised value, excuse me.
Sorry, that's why.
Appraised value, excuse me.
The appraisal was done in June of this year, so we're confident that that is a recent appraisal that we can rely on. The appraised value was done for the land value of the property. It was extremely difficult to provide any valuation for the structure itself, given the fact that we don't really know what the liability is or the preservation or the seismic. And so our appraisal is based off strictly the land value, and it provided a range of values approximately when it looked at comparable sales that have been done of between $85 and $123 as it looks at different properties. And then as part of any appraisal, they make adjustments to those. And it was determined that the land value for this property based on those comparables was $105 a square foot, which equated to the $4,070,000. So just to provide a little context, the $105 a square foot is the same value that we attributed to our State Street property for that sale. And so we feel confident that that value is reflective of what property is within the downtown area.
I guess that's my first concern without data, I guess, put it that way. The concern is that being in the heart of the theater district, that's something you can't replace as far as location, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's hard to make appraisals and evaluations of a property with this building on it and the building itself. I get that piece. Walking through it, I understand that. It does feel low. I guess that's my concern, is that offsetting the loss of something like this, which is difficult to justify cost-wise, saving it. Okay. But the offset doesn't seem quite right. That's what I'm concerned about with the land value. Second piece, I guess, is for the developer themselves, perhaps, is doing the write-down for this in this transaction doesn't have anything to do with their actual development later on, as far as what they're planning on or what they're committing to. Is that accurate? So the design, the use of the building, those kind of details, other than having 30 affordable units, nothing else in there is concrete there design-wise?
I mean, they have proposed their project, if that's what you mean. Sure. But as part of the land write-down, no, the land write-down is what we as an administration have asked to provide in exchange for getting the public benefits, in exchange for asking the developer to incorporate those benefits as part of whatever project they do.
Okay.
So while they may not have fully designed the project yet, we are asking them that as they design it, they include the mid-block walkway, preserve elements, and the affordable housing. And so all we have to contribute to offset that impact is arguably the land value at this time. And so that is how we are structuring that request.
Sure.
And pursuant to the agreement, before we close, the RDA will have access to the final design of the project, and we will put together a committee to review and ultimately approve the final design of the project, including the uses and the square footage and
That's an administrative piece for the RDA, so it wouldn't come back to this board at that point?
No. Not unless there was some component that either Let me back up. The agreement does provide that we can also discuss with the developer other elements to incorporate within their project, as well as the potential for coming and participating further in the project to have those. Those would potentially come to the board if we really wanted to have a specific use in there, if we wanted to have certain design elements within there. If those are at the point where that requires further participation by the agency, then the board would have the ability to chime in at that point and approve that, as well as the details of them.
Can I go down the rabbit hole for one more question, Madam Chair?
Yes, but we are already at 3:10, and we have a very, very busy city council meeting. So, I mean, this is our 4th briefing. I would like for everyone to have questions answered. So if we can maybe, yes, but be mindful of where we're at, please.
Well, I should be short. Nobody else gets to ask a question?
No, that's not what I said.
The question for me then is, if it's approved and it comes back to a design discussion, if the city says we want the theater in the first floor of the building.
I would anticipate that would necessitate a more significant participation and incentive, sure. and that could be part of the conversation, yes.
But where does that fall in this discussion? Administrative board, the board have to approve funding perhaps, but.
Right. It falls initially with the administration and as part of our design review and negotiations with the developer, and to the extent that request or the design elements or the costs of that necessitate a further participation of the agency, or if it's something that we do want to incentivize, then that would come back to the board.
So a future executive director of the RDA could make a stipulation along those lines potentially?
They couldn't necessarily add a stipulation to the agreement, but the agreement already does provide the opportunity for us to have that discussion and that negotiation, and if there is a need to come back for participation, to do that. That's already built into the agreement as we work through the design.
Okay. We estimate that design process to what timeline?
I would assume 6 to 9 months as they go through their design process.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Danny, when we were presenting this project, the renderings, and maybe we were under the understanding that there would be a park or open space accessible to the public in our heads. I think a lot of us understood that, but then when the agreement was signed, that was not part of it because it was not a requirement. It was an optional, an option that the developer could have. Did the executive director ever consider a park as being a must in this write-down?
Yeah, I appreciate the ability to clarify that. I think the reason that it was not put into the agreement as a requirement is because Hines has indicated that they are going to build open space as part of this project. And they have indicated that they are going to do that initially as an amenity both for their residents and their users, their tenants on the first floor. And so we already understand that they are going to do that at a baseline level just as part of their project. The reason we put it in our agreement as an optional element is because of exactly what you're referring to, is that provides us the opportunity to have that conversation with Hines, and that if we as a city or an agency want that park to be built at a higher level of improvements in a way that really encourages more activity and pedestrian use by city residents, then we have the ability to have that discussion with Hines, negotiate what that would be, help with the design, and at the same time have a conversation of what that partnership would be with Hines in order to, one, make it more accessible to the public while still understanding that Hines probably wants to have some controls over it. But two, also have the ability to discuss with Hines is that if we truly want this to be more of a public space, then that probably also needs to come with it the discussion of how we're going to help fund the maintenance of that in order to make it more open to the public on a larger basis.
Thank you.
I do have also one thing, if I can ask Katie, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. I appreciate that there has a lot of what people have said is some frustration of this ordinance, and can you sort of explain that to us? This is our lawyer, Katie Lewis. So she gets to talk the legal talk.
Hi, everyone. Katie Lewis. Nice to see you today. So as I understand your question, you would like me to explain the parameters on the RDA's real property disposition policy?
I would. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks for putting my jabber
Absolutely.
into something that makes sense.
And do you also have questions about the disposition of real property and the state law
Yes.
requirements
How
that were
we,
addressed?
as an RDA, may or may not fall under state law as well.
Great. So Utah Code 1082 has a requirement that every municipality identify significant parcels of real property and adopt an ordinance for the disposition of those parcels, including a public notice requirement. Salt Lake City, through City Code 2.58 and City Code 2.90, has done so. That's for the disposition of city-owned property. The RDA is a separate legal entity. You sit as the board of directors of that entity, and the mayor is the executive director. The RDA is specifically excluded from Utah Code 1082, but the RDA board of directors has adopted a real property disposition policy that in some ways mirrors 2.58, City Code 2.58. It's a little bit different, but one thing that it does have is the identification of certain Tier 1 parcels that really are analogous to significant parcels, and then a process that you are actually going through right now for board approval of the write-down of property values if it's less than 10%. So that's the distinction between the city process and the RDA process. You do have a disposition policy, but it is different and it is not governed by Utah Code 1082.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Board members, does anyone have any comments at this time? Great.
And apologies in advance. I will read this as fast as I can. So actually I won't. But I do.
Read it fast?
I won't read it as fast as I can.
Okay.
So I want to thank all the residents who have contacted me to share their opinions and stories about the Utah Theater. I want to thank Preservation Utah for educating me on the history of the building. And I want to thank the arts community and the film community in particular for helping me understand how we got to this point. The Utah Theater has been shuttered for most of my lifetime. I was born 83, like the previous commenter, and it was shuttered the last time in 1988. I still feel a very personal connection to the Utah Theater. I toured the theater shortly after joining the council, and it had a profound impact on me. Sitting back at my desk is a small piece of rubble from the building that I kept from the tour as a reminder to do all that I can and exhaust every possible option to preserve or adaptively reuse our city's historic buildings. It's a priority for me. It's a priority for the residents of District 3, which includes the oldest neighborhoods in the state. Sadly, as you heard, our vote today is not whether or not to save the Utah Theater. If that were the decision or the question in front of us, I think that I would arrive at a different outcome. That decision's been made by the mayor with the advice and input of not only her administration, but the prior administration. Under our system of government, the executive branch has the authority to dispose of property as well as the authority to negotiate and enter into contracts on behalf of the city. The city council does not have that authority. I understand criticism regarding a lack of transparency on this issue, and more than just understanding it, I empathize it, and I tell you that I have experienced the lack of transparency as a council member on this issue. That's why in my short time in office and working on this issue, I've tried to bring in as much daylight as I could, meeting with historic preservationists, architects, theater goers, movie buffs, and residents to explore realistic and even several unrealistic, or what were told to me as unrealistic options to save or repurpose the theater. But ultimately, when it's time to vote, I have to vote based on the facts. The Utah Theater's fate, I think, can be traced back to the 1950s. And after 60-plus years of compounding circumstances, some of them deliberate and some outside of everyone's control, the vision of a restored, seismically safe, single-stage, logistically limited 1,000-seat venue with a thriving end user that can help us service what the estimated debt would be on the project like this is not going to happen. We don't have the power as a council to undo the decisions that led us to this point. We can't make a benefactor appear, we can't create an end user for the site, and we can't continue to let this property sit for another 10 years. As an RDA board member acting on the facts that exist at this time and at this moment, our decision today comes down to this. Should we take the $4.7 million as cash in hand and make a dent in the city's housing needs? Or should we leverage that investment to make a greater dent in housing and also fill the need for open space in our downtown and the ability to partner with the private sector to replace a former iconic structure with a new iconic structure? And that's why I still think, even with all that, it's an incredibly difficult decision and not one that I take lightly, but I do choose the latter option. I'm also committing to preserve the historic characteristics of the building's interior for future adaptive reuse. I'm committing to funding the documentation, photographing and filming of the structure prior to any demolition and with the direction of an independent historic preservation organization. Finally, I'm also committing to try and prevent some of the circumstances that got us into this unique position. So that's why, Madam Chair, I would ask that we direct RDA staff to review the policy for disposition of adjacent property or of disposition of property to adjacent owners and build in more input and more process from the public through an RFP or some other competitive process. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Mr. Wharton. And I do know that we had discussed that particular ordinance and policy and are looking at having that discussion on a future agenda to kind of parallel that because of this frustration that we have all felt during this process. So I can assure you that I can almost assure you that it will be on a future agenda. It depends on if I'm with the chairperson next year. So
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything else? I would look for a motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make the motion. I move the RDA Board adopt the resolution authorizing a full purchase price write-down of the real property located at 144 to 158 South Main, subject to additional contingencies. Confirmation that the developer intends to build green open space in addition to a mid-block walkway as part of the proposed project, and prior to closing, the developer will provide to the board detailed plans for the open space and proposed costs to A, construct the open space, B, ensure the open space is publicly accessible, and C, maintain the open space. Prior to closing, the board may consider providing incentives to the developer or through the city council related to the open space. I've got, oh yeah, I'm sorry, there's two parts on the back. In addition, that 160 Main LLC is added in the resolution as the additional developer of the project. And 3, that prior to demolishing the Utah Theater, the RDA ensures historic elements of the theater are sufficiently documented through measured drawings, film, photographs, and or written data to provide a detailed record to the board and public of the property's significance.
I have a motion by Board Member Rogers.
I'm still good with the second.
I have a second by Board Member Luke. Do I want to call this or roll call it? I'm going to do a roll call. Anna?
Sure. I would like to read something, and I will vote right after this. Today, I'm being asked by the executive director, who is the mayor, to make a decision on a write-down on a precious piece of property in our downtown. The questions I need to answer is, are the public benefits negotiated with the buyer good enough that it merits the land write-down? It is my opinion that the public benefits negotiated are good. But to me, what's proposed in writing, which does not include a much-needed downtown park accessible to the public, is not good enough. my vote for this land write-down is no. Thank you.
Before I get to you, sorry, Mr. Johnston, Aaron, Aaron, what is your vote?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Board Member Johnston?
No.
Board Member Rogers?
Yes.
Board Member Wharton? Yes. And I'm a yes. Oh, did I get Board Member Luke? Okay.
And Councilmember Wharton, your microphone, we might need you to say yes.
Yes, again.
Okay. Did the recorder get all of that? Sorry about that. Okay. Well, that motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Just so the record is clear, Aaron, are you still on the line?
I am, but I need to step off.
Okay, thank you for joining us for our meeting today. And then Charlie, are you going to continue following along on speakerphone, or are you stepping out as well?
No, I'm gonna be watching online, but I'm not gonna hang on the phone. But if I have anything, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move to agenda item number 2, which is the 900 South Streetscape Improvements and Electrical Undergrounding Follow-Up. We have Ben Ludke, Danny Walls, and Court. Ben, I think we've had several briefings on this one as well, so if we can just do a quick overview and go from there. We are set to take some action. There's a motion sheet in your folders if you want to look at that, and there's other options in the staff report. But Ben, if you kind of want to give us an overview, that'd be great.
The motion sheet is also up on the big screen for reference. The board had a briefing last month on November 12th. The project, which includes 2 components, the streetscape improvements as well as the electrical undergrounding, has a total estimated cost of $7.5 million, and the board has fully appropriated those funds. The question for the board today is how to handle the annual maintenance of the improvements. The current estimate is $44,307 a year, and this includes landscaping, especially of planter beds, as well as the hardscape maintenance, water, electricity, and a small contingency on top of that. Previous designs were significantly higher in their annual maintenance, at one point over $200,000. The $44,307 a year in annual maintenance, the board previously discussed an SAA, a special assessment area, where property owners' vote needs to be 61% support or more, support a levy on their property in order to pay an annual assessment to cover. It can be a portion of or up to the full maintenance cost. It doesn't have to fully cover the annual maintenance. The RDA estimated the cost at $20.69 per linear foot, and with an average property frontage, it would be $2,814 a year to fully cover the annual maintenance. There are 4 options on page 2 of the staff report related to how to pay for the maintenance. The first is scope reductions. If there's not a way or a willingness to pay for the maintenance, you don't build the asset that needs the maintenance. This would be scope reductions in the project. The second option is for the RDA to pay the annual maintenance. This would need to come from Program Income Fund, which is the agency's most flexible dollars that can be spent on any of the agency's purposes. This is necessary because the West Temple Gateway project area is expired, so it doesn't have that tax increment revenue option. A third option is to split the funding between the RDA and the general fund, and this could be split in different percentages or it could be phased in over years. The last option is proceeding with the SAA process, which, as I stated, doesn't have to fully cover the $44,000 annual maintenance cost. It can be less than. Based on discussions with the property owners as well as public comment that was received from some of the tenants and property owners, it is not clear if the process for the SAA would be successful.
Thank you for that. And I don't know if there's comments. Do we have comments on this? I do want to point something out that we sort of already did a scope reduction from what the board originally saw several months ago. I don't even know, last year perhaps. I feel like we've been talking about this for a while. And so the current iteration would not include snow removal for that area or trash. Is that correct?
That's
Corey?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we sort of, if my board members, just to remind everybody, will remember, we kind of started out with this very large maintenance number. I want to say it was somewhere in 100 and...
It was over 200,000 at one point.
And at this point, we're looking at 44. For some reason, I always want to say 56, but 44,000 a year.
It was 56 in April.
See, I do pay attention. So I kind of wanted to give everyone a reminder of that part of the timeline and the process for what we're looking at now. Is there discussion on this? Okay, I would look for a motion. Did you have something, Andrew? I didn't see you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me. So embarrassed. The question comes back to me from a previous time. Would we do this for the other project areas we're looking at? New ones coming on, existing ones? Is the scope consistent? Is there something that would tell me that State Street CDA, 9-line CDA, Station Center, which is a different deal, I know, other places, would this be a template to be kind of used again, or how would it differ potentially?
The answer to that would be no. I think with direction of the board, we've understood that our template for moving forward would probably be one of two paths. One, if it was entirely community driven and the community came to the city and said that they wanted to establish an SAA and tax themselves and do these improvements, that would be one process it could happen. If it was something that the RDA was looking at doing, we understand that we probably still need to update our budget policy to reflect the fact that we would not be doing projects like this until we had this conversation with the board in terms of what the ongoing maintenance costs would be before we make that determination for funding to do a project.
So if we look at, I'll say State Street, because they've probably got a lot of these off in there, they would have to pay for themselves essentially at that point if they want to do a similar process to this one going forward.
It would either need to be community driven, or we as a city would need to agree to all of the costs at the time of making the determination to do the project.
Okay.
If I can speak to that as
Please.
well, with the microphone on, that if you'll remember, probably 6 months ago or so, we had a briefing regarding what I like to refer to as the maintenance menu, and that there are several options for a project to have improved areas, whether it be a streetscape, whether it be any of the other things that might cost the city or the RDA a maintenance amount, a yearly maintenance, that the board come with ideas of how that is going to get done. And so it may be when a project, what we kind of have talked about in that briefing that I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you would go to a project and say, hey, property owners, what do you want? They say, we want what I like to refer to as the unicorn, which is, everything under the sun kind of thing. And they say, okay, well, how are we going to maintain that? And then you get the buy-in from the community, which I think was one of the things that we learned from this particular project. Is it was sort of offered the unicorn, but nobody said, how are we going to feed the unicorn? And now we're trying to figure that out and help the community get what they want. So I think we've learned a lot from this, and as chair have really tried to push how do we have that maintenance discussion before we increase an expectation for the community, but rather bring them along with the discussion of maintenance and the expectations. So I appreciate your question, and I think that that's something that we have to continue having that discussion with.
I bring it up because we're going to have this discussion again, and people are going to say, well, they got that.
Yeah.
2 years ago, a year ago, 3 years ago. And we need an answer for that. I mean, that's my concern is going forward, is that I know we're going to have an option of the discussion about this, and it's going to be an SAA, or we're going to fund it ourselves. But if we don't fund it ourselves,
yes,
it's going to feel inequitable is what's going to happen. So I just need that on the record that we know right now, we know we're at a crossroads. We know it's a difficult decision right now, but it's setting a precedent for us going forward. So if I look at other new ideas coming forward, I'm going to be very inclined to say, well, I feel like we probably need to do that for other areas that may not have the ability to do it themselves for an SAA, just like these folks. The second piece that's going to come into play here, and I'm sensitive to this as somebody who works for a nonprofit, and it got brought up earlier today. I think we are helping nonprofits to stay downtown for a lot of great reasons. But the inability to pay for a major improvement is going to be a dilemma for us doing that. If nonprofits are not expected to pay in, those kind of things are going to be hard. So I want to be cognizant of that. I love the fact that we're having nonprofits in our downtown area. It's beautiful for a lot of reasons. But I can't just sort of say it's hard to pay, therefore you can't. I guess at this point I'm thinking through this and saying if we do it here, I'm going to have to vote to do it in other areas for the city to pay for that, for the RDA to pay for it. It's part of the cost.
And even if we provide that clarity in the policy, obviously you as a board and a city council have the right to vote however you want it at any time. It really just requires us to come and have that conversation before we get too far down a path of making a determination, so you don't feel like you've been boxed in at the time as much as we're having that initially.
James, did you have something you wanted to say?
No,
I saw
when Andrew brought that up, I thought we made it perfectly clear at the last meeting that we weren't going to discuss this until, we weren't bringing up any SAAs until people were bought in on it, so.
Cindy, I heard you.
Just the thought that the council members have had differing viewpoints along the way, and so at some point, we probably need to come to you with just a draft outline of where we think you've landed so that you can tell us, yes, that's where you've landed, or no, that isn't where you've landed, so that in the future, our staff, the RDA staff, and then the general public can know early on where you're coming from. So,
well, and I think, Cindy, to that point, one of the things that we've talked about in our RDA discussions, particularly as it relates to maintenance, is that and really any of the developments, right, is that every project area is different with different needs and different abilities. And I think that goes directly to what you're saying, Andrew, is that, there may be another neighborhood that this is what the answer is. That the answer is the general fund or the RDA or whoever pays for that ongoing maintenance. There may be another project area where it is an SAA. And that's the whole idea, I believe, in having this maintenance menu, that we can sort of say, where are we at and where is the neighborhood at? Where's the community at? And how can we make sure that we are addressing this beforehand so that we aren't where we're at today? So I appreciate that. And I think that that's exactly what we're trying to do with having these ongoing discussions on this.
I appreciate that. I coming from a place of saying a brand new development that has new building on it, say Station Center, right? Mm-hmm. You can start from the ground up, right, and people opt in to that area, right? For areas like State Street and 9 Line that are already established with small businesses who are landowners, and then go in and say, well, you have a choice. You can have the full contingency of maintenance, but you have to do an SAA. They don't have a real good choice then. I mean, that's sort of what we're saying right now. And I don't know, I'm not going to forecast the future, but as a small business owner in those areas, I'd be hard pressed to say, yes, give me the SAA. I'd rather take a minimum level of maintenance that's paid for by the city. So I don't know. I think you're right. The option is there. I think when we get into the nuts and bolts of some of these areas, it's going to be a very different discussion with those property owners. And that's why I'm saying, for me right now, thinking through those 2 new areas particularly, I'm going to feel very inclined to say on record right now that I feel very inclined to have the city pay for the maintenance just like here for a similar level. So.
Great. Any further discussion on this? I would look for a motion. Anna.
I move that the board accept the plan for the general fund to provide basic maintenance to the improvements as currently designed and release a contingency on construction funding for the Central 9th streetscape improvements. It is the understanding of the board that future potential improvements, particularly those involving increased ongoing maintenance costs, will only be considered if adjacent and/or nearby property owners agree to participate in the financing of those improvements and maintenance.
Who seconded? Andrew?
That guy.
I have a motion by Board Member Valdemoros. I have a second by Board Member Johnston. All those in favor?
Wait, I have a question.
Oh, yes.
Thanks, I'm glad I caught that. My question is, what's going to trigger, if there are improved increased maintenance costs, what's going to be the trigger to bring that forward?
I would assume that they would either have to approach the agency or the city on that, and if it's...
So, let's just say garbage bags go up. Is that going to trigger it next year or the following year?
No, because we're not covering...
Okay. If labor rates, well, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there a trigger?
What's the threshold?
The threshold is more, as my understanding, Ben, is if the community comes and wants a higher level improvements installed, either benches or garbage collection, better lighting, whatever.
So it's if somebody comes and asks for an increased
Yes.
service.
Yep.
Basic inflation won't trigger it?
No.
No.
It would be, as I read it, future improvements, so something would need to be built or a new service level would need to be provided. That would be the trigger for the increased costs. To your question about what triggers the discussion that how is the community going to pay for this, it requires city employees to remember this intent and that is the direction the board has given. So to an extent, there's not a automatic this will happen, but it is a decision by this board that staff has a responsibility to carry forward and remember.
Okay.
So I previously had a motion by Board Member Valdemoros and a second by Board Member Johnston. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes. Next on the agenda. Nothing. Reports and announcements from the Executive Director. Thank you, David, for being here. Report and announcement from RDA staff.
None.
Great. Do you have anything, Mr. Vice Chair?
No, thank you.
Great, nor do I. We have no written briefings or consent. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. James, you are the chair for City Council. When do you want to start?
4? Did I give everyone a nice little break?
Fine with me.
Great. 4 o'clock.
Perhaps we should ask our staff. 4 o'clock is fine. We took things off the agenda.